Right on time. Good morning, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this panel session where the title is Global Business in Africa, which is a fantastic topic for us to talk about. Any opportunity where we have such a wonderful platform to share insights into Africa and the magnificence of Africa and the opportunities on the continent is always a wonderful opportunity. With us today, we have a very distinguished panel. It's not a regular opportunity to have such distinguished guests with wonderful insights, and I'm really looking to the conversation and the insights which the ministers can give to us. In terms of the overarching theme of this World Knowledge Forum, which is coexistence in the future, I think Africa plays an immense and important part of that. So to be able to share this with you is fantastic. By way of introduction, I will be the moderator for this session. My name is Tim Dickens. I am based in Seoul. I work for DRNRG LLC and head up the Africa Group. I also head up the South African Chamber of Commerce in Korea, which is the only African Chamber of Commerce. So we are very heavily involved in facilitating trade between Korea in particular and the African continent. In terms of the panel, as I mentioned, they are very distinguished and their CVs are pages long and fantastic from that. So I'll just do a very brief introduction. On my left, we have Minister Mbaye, who's the former Minister of Fisheries and Maritime Economy from Senegal. To his left, we have Minister Teklemariam, which is the FDRE Civil Commission from Ethiopia. I apologize, on the end. And in between, we have Mr. Nduhungirehe, I hope I've got that right in terms of pronunciation, the Foreign Minister for Rwanda. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, and we'll get kicked off. I think that's a good segue maybe to get into discussion. I know prior to this session we were talking about opportunities, and one of those in particular was infrastructure around the ports. Maybe, Minister, we'll start with you from that perspective. What do you see in terms of the opportunities for port infrastructure, particularly with Senegal, but also on the more broader spectrum in terms of Africa?
Thanks again. And as you know, apart South Africa, which is a little bit far with regard to other countries, the main problem that we have in Africa is our port infrastructure. Today, a carrier has to take a cargo from the US, from Europe, etc., but he must stop Dakar, Nouakchott, Conakry, Bissau, Abidjan, Lomé, Tema, Cotonou, Nigeria, Walvis Bay, or Douala, or Luanda. And what we need is to have a very modern infrastructure in port-wise, which can accept the Panamax vessel. And the Panamax vessel has a capacity of between 20 and 22,000 containers per vessel. It means the carrier do not need to stop port by port, but to create a hub. Maybe a hub in, today we have Tanger Med. It's always a good port with 5 million containers per year. You need to have one in Dakar, one in the main ports. Ivory Coast. You can have another one in Nigeria, maybe also in Walvis Bay. In the eastern part, you can have one in Dar es Salaam and also one in Mombasa. The advantage that we have in my country, we'll be able to discharge all the containers in Dakar ports, and it will be a good opportunity for us, and the authorities belong to a continental organization, to have our own maritime company, an African one, with several feeders Feeders means small boats, which small vessel with a capacity around 1,000 container. It can go from Dakar to Luanda, Dakar to Conakry, Dakar to another ports. It saves time for the carriers. We have southern services and northern services. And the hub will be a transshipment port. The vessel will stay not longer with all cargoes in the same time, and it creates a lot of job for young people. As you know, this job is not for well-educated people, and you know, the level of our education is far behind things in Korea or also in Europe. And I think step by step, we'll be able to win unemployment and also try to have adapted and very developed port infrastructure.
Thank you, Minister. I think that's very insightful in terms of the connectivity. And maybe Minister, from a Rwanda's perspective, maybe port development is not required, but the interconnectivity between the ports and getting, let's say, critical minerals out from Rwanda, for example, onto the ports, how important is that sort of interconnectivity between infrastructure, let's say between ports, for example, in Senegal and Rwanda, in terms of whether it's the rail, the road, etc. How much opportunity do you see for development of infrastructure for the interconnectivity, particularly for ports, for import and export, from Rwanda's perspective?
Thank you. Rwanda, as you know, is a landlocked country, but we are connected to a number of ports because of regional integration. We are a member of the East African Community with Tanzania, which has the the Dar es Salaam port, and Kenya with Mombasa. So we have two corridors, what we call the Northern Corridor, and the Central, from Mombasa, Kampala, Kigali, and to Central Corridor, Dar es Salaam, Isaka, Kigali. And we are now in integration in four, there are four pillars of integration within the East African Community, which was the Customs Union, which was the first pillar, which was critical for us as a landlocked country, the Customs Union. And then the common market. Common market was the second phase, which is also important because it allowed for free movement of people, goods, services, capital, labor within the community. So the costs of doing business, cost of transport, were significantly reduced. And the cost of, we are now talking about railway between Dar es Salaam, Isaka, and Kigali, even in our whole region, because this is what will speed up the process and ensure that there's export and import in better conditions for the whole of the community, but in particular for landlocked countries of the community, mainly Rwanda, but also Burundi and Uganda. So we benefit a lot for the integration, regional integration, and we access to those two ports that are important for us. We are even being granted land at Mombasa, but also inland dry ports to be able to clear goods from the ports. So it's important. We are landlocked, but we are, as we said, land-linked.
And maybe that ties in, Minister Teklemariam, for the perspective of the interconnectivity of Africa. And I guess a very important development has been the signing of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. How do you see that plays a part in the development of Africa, particularly for this interconnectivity? And likewise, I think you touched earlier on digitalization of these processes. So how do you see that developing in Ethiopia, but also as a sort of a broader spectrum continental view?
Thank you very much indeed. I think the partnership, the collaboration between Africa and Ethiopia should be a win-win scenario. Africa has natural resources like platinum, like 89% of the world, chromium, like 80% of the world, magnesium, like 61% of the world, and cobalt, around 52% of the world material, raw material. So minerals like gold, silver, these all can be input for African raw material as export and value addition and input for Korean processing factories. So for this, I think to mobilize this infrastructure, railway infrastructure, logistics, and the supply chain efficiency is very, very important. As all we understand, the Korean population is, I think, starting from 2020, it is a tipping point, like from the growth, and it is becoming saturated. But in the case of Africa, the African population is around 1.4 billion. From this 1.4 billion population, around 65% is youth, which is around 900 million youth productive age population. So in this scenario, enhancing the infrastructure, connecting Africa to mobilize the minerals, raw materials, and having the productive age population, which is 65% of the population. So making the collaboration a win-win scenario is very, very important. And also Africa can be a big market for Korea, like in the house appliances, medical devices, technological semiconductors, computers, and mobiles. These all processed products can be a great potential, having a continent with a population of 1.4 billion population size. So in this scenario, focusing on the raw materials, the productive age population, and connecting through infrastructure and making the port and the logistics and supply chain more effective and efficient can be a win-win scenario for both partners like Korea and Africa as a continent.
And I think that ties in very nicely with the overall view of this World Knowledge Forum in terms of coexistence in the future, that we're looking for that win-win situation. It's interesting that you touched on the aging population in Korea, where I think, Minister, you mentioned from a Rwandan perspective, one of the important challenges there is turning the demographic dividend for global skills in the future. So what is Rwanda's plans in terms of the youth and the development of the youth in terms of future employment opportunities and skills development?
Thank you. Rwanda and Africa in general Africa is a young continent. It is expected that by 2030, young Africans will be around 50% of the global youth population. So then we all know that Africa is 21st century is the continent of Africa, as we say, that Africa will be the engine of the growth. But the growth is not about the wealth, the natural wealth that we have. It's about the human capital, the young population. I think 70% of the population in Africa, I think, is below 30 years. So we need to find jobs for that population. And of course, the jobs that we have now, the job of the present are not job for the future. So we need to equip the young population with a set of skills of the future. in ICT, for example, and new technologies. And this is why in Rwanda we have decided to really embrace ICT, and embrace technology. So now we are having now young Rwandans in operating and programming machines, the coding. I think we are training up to we are planning to train up to 1 million Rwandans, young Rwandans, in that area. Because those are the job of the futures that will enable our population, Rwandan population, and at large African population, to be competitive on the market. Because we have a workforce that should be empowered, and for that, education is key. Education is key, capacity building, and this is where the partnership with a country like the Republic of Korea is important, because we know that they have been there. They have a very good educational system, and the ICT, they are very well advanced. So the cooperation in that sector, in education, is important. This is why Korea, the Republic of Korea, is supporting the TVET sector, what we call TVET, Technical and Vocational Education Training, for Rwandans, and they are also investing in ICT, and this is what we plan to achieve together, because we need, of course, economic growth, we need jobs, but jobs of the future, and through the young population that we have.
I think that's a great point you touched on, and I think Korea has been phenomenal in terms of the human resource development. With the lack of resource on the peninsula here, I think they've been really good at that. So probably a good opportunity for a collaboration in terms of learning how to do that. Mr. Mbaye, obviously with the infrastructure that we're looking for to develop, from a Senegalese perspective and probably greater from an African perspective, how would you look at, for example, a country like Korea assisting in that? Would it be purely on a sort of a capital expenditure in terms of financing of the projects? Would you look at it as a more technological investment in terms of digitalization of all these structures? What do you see, and what would you need from a Senegalese perspective?
Thank you again, and congratulations, dear Minister from Rwanda. And I fully agree with you about the point where you focus is the young people in Africa. It might be an opportunity, it might be a danger. And I think we have to choose the opportunity. But we need to have the tools to be able to transform the young people to be able to be a good manpower for the future. And now 70% of them are under 30. It's a power for our country, African continent. But those population must be well educated. And Korea is a good partner in shipping and maritime economic. They build academy of maritime economy, maritime science in Senegal. It will be very helpful for the young people, and now they can receive good education to be able to be a good pilot for a vessel, and also to be well educated in order to be able to do all jobs in fishing, production, exportation of fish, etc., etc. And where we need to have assistance from the foreign investigators, mainly from Korea, is the digitalization. because the world is working in digitalization wise. That's why the sample of Korea must be followed by African countries. Try to build a very strong relationship with Korean guys. It will be very helpful for our young generation and also for the future of our country.
And it's good that we've touched on this. I see there are quite a number of young attendees in the audience. It does show that the youth are very interested in development of the future and also of Korea-Africa relations. Maybe to touch on a point that I want to sort of highlight in terms of what I see as a major milestone, and I come back to the Africa Continental Free Trade Arrangement. Minister, from Rwanda's perspective, in terms of the structure that's been put in place, how is Rwanda looking to not monopolize, but at least mobilize this structure of the Continental Free Trade Area in terms of this interconnectivity? We talk about digitalization to sort of have a one market where everything is very smooth and can move through the different areas without much difficulties in terms of, taxes, trade, systems in terms of logging items, etc. What is Rwanda's goal, and what is your plans in place in terms of utilizing this sort of one market?
Thank you. The signing of the African Continental Free Trade Area was an important milestone for the integration of the continent. That agreement was signed in Kigali, in Rwanda, in March 2018. And this AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, was one of the flagship projects of the African Union in its Agenda 2063, because you have an agenda for 2063, which will be the centenary of the OAU/AU. We have a number of flagship projects, including that one. And this is really, I believe that it should be a game changer, because the intra-Africa trade is very low when compared to the global trade. I think it must be 3% or something like that. It's very low. We have African countries that trade easily with Europe and Asia than with the neighbor. So this Africa Continental Free Trade Area is a game changer. It was now it is in force. I think even the trading under the AfCFTA has begun, and it is expected. This is what the experts say, that it will boost the inter-Africa trade by more than 60%. And of course, Rwanda wants to take advantage of that. But for that, of course, there is a challenge for all of us to make that a success. There is this connectivity that we're talking about. We still have issues of infrastructure, connection between African countries. There is also the issue of industrialization of the continent, because this is a key, having industries producing locally to sell to local markets or regional market. We were talking about mining a few minutes ago. The issue of mining, we have, it is said that we have around 30% of reserves, world reserves, known reserves of mining, but we export raw materials. There's no local chain of production to give value to the mines, to the resources that we have, which will give us more, of course, revenue, but also industrialize our continent and also create jobs in Africa. So this is a game changer, but we need to take advantage of it by doing all those reforms that we need in connectivity, industrialization. There are also other issues that we'll need to solve of governance, of stability, and conflicts that we still have on the continent. But we believe that, as we say that the 21st century is the century of Africa, this is an opportunity to make good use of this breakthrough that we have which will enable the African continents to trade with each other and then increase our economies and economic growth.
Thank you. And I think, Minister, from Ethiopia's perspective, I think what we've touched on is this key question about industrialization on the continent and how do we, particularly with the global supply chain for, I think, critical minerals, I think there's been a significant shift in attention to Africa to find alternative supply chains. By way of example, Korea is highly dependent on China for a lot of the processed minerals or critical minerals. How do you see Ethiopia and Africa, from a broader perspective, working towards this industrialization, and how do we partner up with Korea to ensure that industrialization stays on the continent so we can extract, produce, process, manufacture on the continent?
As all the panelists are focusing on to process the raw material and the mineral, so the infrastructure issue is very, very a critical point. And as you reiterated, the digitalization for enabling the industry to be efficient and effective is very, very important. And the supply chain, Ethiopia located at the eastern part of Africa and as a hub of Africa, since Addis Ababa is the seat of African Union, so it is very, very important to have impact on the supply chain. So I think my focus is to create a win-win scenario for Korea and for Africa to have a mutual benefit and collaboration. For example, if we are going to take the digitalization, digitalization is going to have very big contribution for manufacturing, industrialization, to decrease cost and to increase quality and to improve productivity. Digitalization is very, very important. In that scenario, Africa is going to be benefited from the technical expertise of Korea, the technology, innovation capability of Korea, which is going to have very good opportunity for Africa to have the required development and growth. In that scenario, I think Korea has a good comparative and competitive advantage on skilled manpower, the software development, and the technical know-how and the technical devices for manufacturing improvement, for the supply chain improvement, like supplying ship, production, and related issues. So in that scenario, if we are going to optimize the collaboration, it is going to be a win-win. A market for Korea and a technology transfer for Africa, which is going to be a mutual benefit for both partners, which I want to emphasize on that part.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this session. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank first the ministers for your time, your valuable insight. Secondly, to the hosts of this, the MBN team, it's fantastic to have an opportunity to platform Africa, and I think it's an important step forward in the relationship between Korea and Africa. Thirdly, to the attendees here, thank you for your interest in Africa as well. I think it's important to share knowledge and share information. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity, as we can hear, between what Korea has in terms of their offerings across infrastructure, energy, ICT, digitalization, and the needs on Africa. But likewise, what Africa can also offer to Korea in terms of their skills, their resources, and going forward, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. Thank you. Wish you all the best for the rest of the day and have a rest for a good lunch as well. Take care.